Another interesting little factoid, in raising two children, I constantly reminded them that their smartphones actually can be used to make and receive phone calls. Because my son would say, Dad, don't call, just text me if you need me. But one of the interesting stats is wireless data traffic is now 6 times greater than the voice traffic on the network. So not only is data tsunami hitting the network, but it's largely just data. And so what that means is there's a continued pressure on capacity, driven largely by video applications, and of course the rapid adoption of a smartphone and tablets into our network. So AT&T, we have almost 3/4 of our postpaid customers are running smartphones. So the actual stat's 73%, which is pretty significant. And so for a solution, AT&T recently announced Project Velocity IP, which is a $14 billion, that's with a B, initiative to build out and continue to build out our network. And so by the end of 2015, we'll add an additional 10,000 macro sites, in addition of 1,000 DAS system, and in addition 40,000 small cells. So again, we're doing what we can to get in front of this curve. And actually, since 2008, AT&T has invested $98 billion in its network. And we have invested more in our network, we have spent more on our network than any other public company in the United States. And that's pretty significant. And we expect to spend $21 billion this year, building out our wireline and wireless network. So of course, our topic today is the evolution of DAS. So now you know why we're doing it. Now let's talk about specifics. As you know, we're rolling out LTE, and as Dan had already mentioned, LTE is more spectrally efficient than previous technologies, supporting an even greater number of users over a greater speed. The next version of LTE, LTE Advanced, will support speeds of up to 1 gigabit download speeds. So you imagine that now, you're running gig applications on your phones. Not to be outdone by Wi-Fi, the next version of Wi-Fi, 802.11ac, also supports 1 gig download speeds. So Wi-Fi will continue to play a role in building wireless deployments at large public venues. And so with DAS systems, we expect to see a greater integration of both licensed as well as unlicensed technology. So in addition to providing wireless operators with a platform that we could use largely to offload our traffic onto, Wi-Fi provides the venue owners with a platform where they could have custom applications, custom landing pages, and then they could offer their end users, like at sporting events, the end users or fans attending the game could run high bandwidth applications on their devices at the venue. Because in talking with the venue owners of these sporting events, they're primarily competing against your TV set. They're trying to get you off of your couch to go to their venue. And in order to accomplish that, they need to provide you pretty much everything you have aside from the free beer and wine with what you need in order to enjoy that game. Initially, when DAS systems were built to provide coverage. As we've discussed, there's a lot of reasons why DAS systems are now being used and deployed for capacity reasons. And when you look at DAS deployments over the years, they've changed quite a bit. I mean, when you're looking at deploying DAS at a stadium, you pretty much used to have just 2 sectors. You'd have one sector for one side of the field, another sector for the other side of the field. Of course, sectorization is the way in which you can gain additional spectral efficiencies. But that wasn't enough. And so we're going towards sectoring the stadiums an even greater. So another methodology which was used until recently was to mount an antenna, beaming down to fans, effectively covering each section of the stadium. stadium. But that's not enough. You know, again, we have such a tremendous growth rate. We have so many people in the audience running devices at these venues. So now at AT&T Park, we're actually installing the access points below the seats, and they're being installed on every third row. And so instead of having antennas, say, mounted on the ceiling, you know, beaming down to everyone in this one section of the stand, imagine, if you will, every third row now has an AP supporting even greater capacity because those cells are smaller and smaller. In 2012 alone, AT&T added 850 data systems to their network. And so what we need to do is to be able to deploy DAS faster and at lower cost. And one way of doing that and what we're seeing is some of the changes taking place in the industry is the OEMs are actually building their systems with color-coded terminals and cables allowing for quicker installation. That not only allowing for quicker installation, but also reduces some of the time required for troubleshooting, right? So if they're in a hurry, plug the blue cable into the blue slot, plug the yellow cable into the yellow slot. And my final point, and I'll shut up and get down, is unfortunately after 9/11, you know, we've really seen the need and demand in support of public safety. You know, how the story would have changed had the Twin Towers had perfect coverage within that facility to where we could reach those first responders to tell them to come out of the towers. So we're seeing, you know, greater emphasis placed on the industry to provide a fully integrated solution to support public safety in addition to the commercial licensed spectrum. So thank you very much.
All right, now I'll bring on Ken Sanfil to give some insight from Install Technologies and we'll talk as well. We've got some slides here.
So in support of, totally agree with a lot of what Jim said. Most importantly, the tsunami. You know, we all talk about it in different terms. The tsunami, the onslaught, the curve, the graph that is unbelievable every year, right? It's really the quest for densification. It also is the quest for solutions that help make that faster and more cost effective. I'm going to share with you a couple of pictures here because, like Jim, I wanted you to not have to look at a bunch of bullets. Make it real simple for our discussion today, which is the evolution of DAS. What you're looking at here, if you can find what I'm going to be talking about here, does everyone see the DAS, small cell, Wi-Fi capable street furniture? That's a term that I picked up a little over a year ago, and I started using it because street furniture is something that's not a tower. It's not a little device that goes on a wall. Can you forward it one so everyone knows what I'm talking about? Essentially, very, very small equipment that is very high capacity and very scalable and enables the operators, the city, whoever is deploying these networks to deploy things that are much more aesthetically pleasing. It's very small in size. This is a rendering, but this particular design is all carbon fiber. It's completely watertight, designed to survive a city flood or any other type of situation. Very low power consumption, single strand of fiber, silent, no fans, because people don't want to listen to that stuff. They're very particular in the city. Notice I also put a parentheses around the city, because that's where the densification is going to occur. And that is one of the biggest problems in deploying these networks. It needs to be multi-operator, potentially. It doesn't have to be. It needs to support things like Band 14 public safety. I think after we saw Bill talk today, I think we all realized that deploying public safety is not an optional thing. It's something that we're going to be doing as both a equipment providers and operators. It's something that we're all going to be a part of as that happens. These solutions also have to be scalable to support Ethernet, CPRI, in order to provide a platform for a pole like this to be able to handle small cell devices, Wi-Fi devices, whatever the city or whoever the provider is or whoever put the system together, they need to be able to scale. So is DAS, a lot of people say, well, is DAS dead because it's being replaced? I believe it's part of the toolkit. We solidly believe in a toolkit approach, and we believe solutions like this from an outdoor approach are really what are going to make a difference inside the city. Next slide. From an in-building approach, I just wanted to spend just a minute here on kind of the vision of where we see things going. DAS is an infrastructure, and the thing about DAS is it's really not the function that's going to change per se, right? We are trying to get coverage and we're trying to get capacity to that. But first and foremost, it's a cabling infrastructure. And I think you'll see a trend in the industry towards more active solutions. And the reason being is because solutions like what I have up there is what we deploy every day, and lots of them, right? Across this board here, we deploy lots of these solutions. They're single purpose. From an enterprise perspective, they don't really have a hard ROI for them, although having improved cellular service in their facility is a huge benefit and potentially an ROI to them. But there's no other purposes where they're going to add to the system. It's very intrusive. Coax cables are not the most friendliest thing to stuff in a ceiling and squeeze around the building. It's expensive to install. You typically need, the installers have highly trained teams to make sure it's put together right and it's tested properly. And it's hard to scale. As we migrate from LTE to LTE Advanced to MIMO, multi-MIMO, I mean, there's all kinds of crazy advances in the technology that are using that spectrum more and more efficiently. The coax and the antennas are pretty much what they are, right? You're not going to get any more, a whole lot of technology out of it. Next slide. So where we see some of the vision going is into essentially an active topology. Lots of people in the marketplace are looking to solve how to better distribute active elements in the ceiling. This vision here shows you a little bit about what we see. It basically shows the ability to put active devices in the ceiling, not on a coax. Next slide. And also have the ability to add a small cell to that architecture. Because, one thing's for sure, we're not going to go tomorrow and deploy a whole building full of small cells. But when they start coming, we're going to need an architecture. We're going to need an infrastructure that's going to be able to take our legacy requirements for distributed RF and migrate to more active topologies. But we're not going to be able to do it all at once. It's not going to be feasible. We're going to need a way to migrate. Next slide really shows it going to that nth degree. Now you're talking about solutions that the enterprise, even a hotel like this, is going to gravitate towards, potentially wanting to invest in that infrastructure so that potentially the carrier or whoever's deploying it and wanting to pay for it is not burdened with the whole infrastructure. And now you have a solution that's going to distribute RF from a legacy perspective, small cells, Wi-Fi, if that's required, that's clearly part of the toolkit approach, and potentially even solve some of the LAN or the wired requirements for distributing broadband capacity. Most of it, I think we all agree, we'd like it all to be wireless. But the reality is sometimes you just need an RJ45. And so there's no reason why these solutions can't provide some of that functionality. So that's a little bit about the vision that we see coming. A lot of these things are already available, and some of the things are in beta, but it's absolutely a vision of where things are going. DAS is going to evolve. Small cell and all these things are going to be part of that toolkit together with DAS. DAS is an infrastructure.
John, great. Thanks so much. Appreciate that. All right, now let's bring on Greg Jacobs from Connectivity Wireless. Get your overall view of kind of how you see the maturation and evolution of DAS.
Yeah, I don't have any slides or commercials, so just look at Ken, I guess, while I talk.
Well, there's play the video.
Hey, I see plenty of it, trust me. No, I wanted to take a little different approach, and our company, Connectivity Wireless, is an integrator. And so we kind of put all this together. These are our partners here next to me, and these are our customers down here. But What we kind of look at the overall market in 3 or 4 different areas. First is kind of the ecosystem. And one of the evidence is that is just look around the room. I mean, we got a lot of folks in here to hear about DAS, so that makes you kind of part of the ecosystem. Or you thought this was the Bacardi Rum Convention, I'm not sure. But when I started in DAS years ago, evolution of DAS, that they would have had this in a phone booth. So, we've seen a lot more interest in it over the last 8-10 years. And so from an ecosystem perspective, when we started out years ago, it was really carrier driven. The carriers, it was kind of a necessary evil for them to bring coverage in as they were building out their macro networks. Now, as you've heard over the last few minutes, it's really more about the connectivity, the not only just connectivity, but also around the bandwidth concerns and the growing need for that. And so the other thing that we've seen over the last few years is it's become more of more of an enterprise or venue-driven approach. And when I started in this, the enterprise or the enterprise customer didn't really care what was put in, didn't have any thoughts about it. They were usually a one-carrier shop and said, hey, you either put your coverage in my venue or I'm leaving you. And that was before we really even started using data or anything like that. What you see now, the hospitality industry, go back 7 or 8 years. If you looked at their comment cards, they asked about food and comfort level and things like that. They kept their head in the sand about cellular coverage. Well, think about it. If I stay in a hotel and it doesn't have coverage, am I going to get rid of my carrier or am I not going to stay in that hotel anymore? So now, hospitality industry recognizes that they've got this is a core system that they need to address, or a core concern of their customers that they need to address. Same thing with venues. Go to the University of Georgia football games. It's sold out every year. But you know what? The student section is about 50% full. These kids don't know what a landline is. They don't understand not having connectivity, and frankly, they'll just stay at home. If they can't tweet and put pictures on Facebook and things like that, they can't stay at home. So not only is the SEC and college football dealing with that, but so is the NFL and NASCAR and every other hospitality or event-based industry like that. The other thing that we're seeing is the ecosystem is growing more. Historically, if you go way back, it was the carriers buying the products and services, and it was the OEMs, and then there was a handful of guys like us that maybe ex-engineers from a carrier had a truck and some wire crimpers and went out and put in a few DAS systems, what were called DAS systems at the time. Now it's really grown, and if we had a show of hands in here, there's probably a lot of you that are in various industries that touch this. There's consultants now around DAS. There's obviously the OEMs. Obviously the carriers are a big part of it. But there's even consultant. You go to universities and that sort of thing now, and they'll have somebody that's over their wireless, or even I've seen a DAS manager on business cards now at enterprise organizations. So we're seeing it become more and more of an important part of everybody's infrastructure, to where now, it usually falls under IT. We were talking earlier at lunch, and if you went in and talked to a hospital 8, 9 years ago, or 7 years ago, even 6 years ago, and gave them a price tag for DAS, they threw up and told you to get out. And then they went and tried to figure out how they were going to get this free DAS. And then when that didn't work, they put a budget together, and then they put an RFP together, and now they bought and own their own DAS. So we've seen that change a lot. On the technology side, these guys will cover that a lot better than I'll be able to. But, again, we saw it go from a single carrier system where if you wanted 3 carriers, then you put in 3 different systems. And when these guys' architecture sit next to me here, went to where you could run the various technologies and then some, because we certainly are using different technologies now than we were 6 or 7 years ago, over one system. It really made it more palatable for the venue owner, because they knew that they didn't have to say, well, if I let Verizon in, then I probably need to let somebody else in. They're going to put theirs in over the next 3 months. Then AT&T is going to put theirs in over the next 3 months. And it was hugely disruptive, especially in healthcare where you've got to put tents up and things like that. So with the one thing that I think really helped us evolve was these guys' architecture. What we try to watch as an integrator is where's the architecture going, and it will certainly be driven by the carriers. But I think the venue owners will have a lot more say in that now. One case in point is on the small cell side. The carriers can talk about small cell all they want. Right now there isn't a multi-carrier small cell. So come talk to a venue and say, hey, Diplomat, I'm Verizon, I'm going to put in a small cell solution. Okay, will that work for AT&T? Nope. Will it work for Sprint? Nope. Will it work for T-Mobile? Nope. So wait, they got to each put in a small cell solution? Yeah. That's just not going to work. So ultimately, I think the technology will have to get to where you're able to get to some sort of multi-service type small cell solution. And then the last thing really that I kind of want to talk about is the economic model that we've seen. I started out with a carrier, and it was our fault if Venue didn't have coverage, and it was 100% our burden to make sure that they got coverage. Well, now coverage has transformed itself. What the customer is really asking for now is service, right? Because you can put coverage in, but if you don't have bandwidth, then it really doesn't matter. So, we've seen the model. While the largest spend in our industry still is among the carriers, you're seeing a huge shift. That percentage is still there or growing, but the amount of dollars that you're seeing spent by the enterprise is equally growing. There's some accounts that say over the next 2 years that healthcare industry alone will spend $2 billion in DAS, which is bigger than any of the budgets that any of the carriers have currently over a 2-year period. So, we're seeing the enterprise actually have a little bit more of a say in this industry, and they certainly are getting more attention. You're seeing consultants out there that handle just, healthcare IT, and we kind of work with some of those guys. So, the other thing that you're seeing out there that has really gotten more prevalent, and there's companies that are out there now that 4 or 5 years ago weren't there, and they're major players in this part of the industry, but is the neutral host model, which is basically taking the tower model that has been used for the last 25 years. Hey, we're a company. We're one of the companies that do this is technically a REIT, and they're going to go out there. They're going to lease land. They're going to put up a tower, and then they're going to have the carriers lease that back from them. That model has moved indoors to where a customer or one of these companies that has capital will come to the diplomat, say, Diplomat, how about you give us exclusive rights to putting a DAS in here? We won't charge anything, or whatever their financial model may be. They sign that contract, and then the neutral host operator goes and works with the carriers to define their requirements, puts the system in on their capital or some kind of shared model, and then charges back the carrier. That model is more and more prevalent. It's a great model because it allows the carrier to achieve their objectives of basically getting a network in there without a lot of capital outlay up front. For the neutral host operator, they have capital. They need just to get a return on it. So they would deploy that capital and then get it back in a recurring revenue stream. And then the venue gets more or less many times a free DAS, which can be the hardest thing to convince them of. They're waiting for the other shoe to fall. So those are just, I knew these guys were going to kind of talk about it from a little bit different perspective, and I think that's why Dan put together a group of folks that have varying backgrounds and interests in the industry. So those are some things that I didn't think everybody else was going to talk about, so I thought I'd go over that. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Appreciate that. Thanks. And let's bring on Patrick Bob from CommScope. So that is inside as well. Patrick.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon. CommScope is an infrastructure equipment manufacturer, and we provide end-to-end solutions to our both wired and wireless customers. That includes all the critical infrastructures. And through its Andrew portfolio of the wireless solution, and we have close to 30 years of experience doing the installing, managing some complex distribution systems. And our customers pretty much all here at the table, from wireless customers, facility owners and management, and the system integrators. And I had a couple of slides, and hopefully not too boring. Just next one, please. Now you look at a DAS. I think I'm going to be talking about maybe certainly from a DAS equipment vendor perspective. DAS, we can all agree for the last couple of days and probably the last few years, has come a long way over the years. It's no longer just an ad hoc, and we're talking about the coverage versus capacity. And you're talking about DAS, and DAS is literally everywhere today, right? Talking about that's why we're all here. And as a matter of fact, and I think it's great to be here at the show, and every time you're walking around, you see new companies that are getting into the market, either they're integrators or equipment vendors, and it's a great thing for the whole industry. And one report, if you read it, and I think they were talking about 1 million nodes were shipped in 2012, and it's expected to ship by 2.5 million nodes by 2017. Now, the market is supposed to be doubled in size. Now, if you look at some of the charts, all the predictions from the experts are wrong. So if you're thinking about going to be more, I think is a little bit more conservative, but I think that's what some of the reports are showing. Next, please. Like I said, it's interesting. I think we were talking about DAS. It seems like it's been a long time, but actually it hasn't been that long. If you look at the trend, right, in the last 5 years, for the mobile traffic and versus the data and the behavior, and also the DAS design philosophy, in the last 5 years that you're talking about, even back in 2007, that's before all the smartphones and tablets, all the fever. And clearly, coverage outdo capacity. And I think from DAS design perspective, and you have certain things to do it. And you look at going forward to 2009, and I think this is the first generation of a smartphone. And actually people, industry make a big deal about it because finally data and coverage and voice they're equal. And now you're fast forward to today, and you look at the blue line for the data, that's exponentially growing for data. And what Jim was talking about, there's no wonder it's 6 times the data traffic versus voice. And that is about right. And I'll give you just another example. And in reality, I think it's a snapshot, but if you look at an example, 2 Super Bowls, all those peak hour, that's really the most traffic, the wireless data traffic. In 2011, during that peak hour, versus 2013, just this year. And the data traffic this year has grown over 100% just in 2 years span. Now, is it really the trend? You can generalize talking about the industry. I'm not sure, but you can only to predict is something the unknown. Is really we're in the midst of wonderful growing market for everybody. Next one. Now here's from a vendor perspective, right? And what does it really do to vendor equipment, the DAS vendor providers? If you look at different things, the same venue, you look at venue probably 5 years ago, and the same sports venue can be covered probably by 5 or 6 sectors. And the same venue, people have been doing it again, upgrading or rip and replace. Now today it may have 30 or 40 sectors. So what you're talking about, the reason I'm saying that is all those adding additional technologies, the spectrum, it doesn't really come in for free. You want to aggregate all the services into one pipe. There's certain things you need to worry about, all the interference mitigation and different operators, different stringent requirements for PIM and everything else. You have to make the filtering and all the different equipment. Now, it's interesting to see from a vendor perspective, the process of deploying a DAS. And these are the 4 processes we normally see. You got to have a design planning. You need to have installation. You need a commissioning. You need to have a system optimization. And regardless, you're a 5-sector system or a 30, 40-sector system. Now, what does it add to the complexity to the system is time consuming. A lot of times we're talking about the more complex the system requires more manpower, requires more time. Unfortunately, I think everybody here in the room, we're in the business. You realize those are highly trained technicians and engineers. They're always in short supply. And guess what? At the end of the day, you have a fixed on-air date to meet, and you don't have access to the equipment or the equipment delay. You're talking about some access for the head-end, installation, troubleshooting, all that. And you have to be forced on air when the system is not necessarily fully optimized. I'm sure somewhere we all have heard or learned or experienced in our firsthand. Next one. The idea is we're trying from a vendor perspective, we're trying to make that process less painful or less dependent on those highly trained engineers and technicians. And make those, I guess you can design in such a way you can embed it some sort of engineering intelligence, make it less painful, less costly, certainly less time consuming, and less prone to error. Now, what are the things, a couple things I wanted to address that I think impacted DAS network to the growth, the future, right? First and foremost, you want to address the network quality. And to end users, it had to be transparent. It doesn't matter, you have 8 different frequency bands or different technologies. I don't think really the user care exactly who they're using. They want to make sure they get it. I can get it indoor, outdoor, outdoor, indoor. Now, a lot of times when you don't have the fully optimized systems on air, and you do have a lot of complaints about DAS, and sometimes the general perception of DAS is not as productive as macro sites. And that all has to do, I mean, talking about all the partners and customers, and you have to work together. These are, I guess, devils in the details. You just have to go through that. And the second thing is, from our perspective, to make the equipment more intelligent, if you will, or less time consuming, so you can save some of the hard to get resources. At the end of the day, and I think it's upon us as a vendor community, it's our ability to scale to a DAS. We know we have 2 more spectrums are coming up, and you know the cycles are going to begin to build out the macro network and in-building, add to it all the systems inside. You have to be able to upgrade, or you can redo it again, or adding more sectors. All these are the things, ability to scale to DAS and time to market, which is really important, and that will suffer if we can't really put a system on air in a timely and quick manner. I think in closing, I think the final points I want to make is, at the end of the day, we, as a vendor community, you face a challenge with all the complexities, different spectrum, different technologies, and more stringent requirements from the mobile operators and how you want to do things. And when you add to all that, we have to meet the challenge, how we can adapt, make it a simpler, the implementation, that's really the key. And I think Jim was talking about, they're looking at lower cost and faster deployment of the DAS. And I think as a goal for us, you can make it more flexible for the implementation, make it easier. And I think that's the impact to the future of the DAS. Thank you.
Great, I appreciate it. And last but not least, from Boingo, I'd like to bring on Doug Lutter from Boingo. Obviously, I know your colleague yesterday was on stage and provided quite a bit of background for those who don't know anything about Boingo and what we do with the DAS space, but obviously bring Doug on to provide some more insight there and your views of DAS going forward.
Sure. So always easiest to go last. So kind of piling on to some of the other points that have already been made and kind of making a case for the business model side of everything. You heard from Nick yesterday kind of what we do, so I won't really dive into that. I think the point Jim was making about Wi-Fi being a critical component to all these in-building solutions that are being built, that's really our position. And as we see the evolution of DAS, we really see it as an evolution of wireless. There's different technologies, there's different solutions, and many more are going to arise. Greg talked about the importance of the venue and the business model. And for us, the venue is everything. We're not just providing licensed cellular coverage for the venue. We're providing a lot of different solutions, everything from Bluetooth to Wi-Fi to closed caption to public safety. There are so many different uses for the infrastructure that we're putting in the building, and the venues are becoming a lot more sophisticated, as was already brought up. And they know that when you're going to be there with a crew pulling cable in their walls, that there's a good opportunity for them to extract some value there for themselves. So, what we see is the continued evolution of the business model of operating these networks. Wi-Fi has shifted from a service that's paid for to a service that's free. Cellular has shifted from, unlimited data to metered data. So the business models continue to change, and I think that's really where we see the evolution going and staying on top of how we can monetize these networks, because they are getting more expensive. And as the costs go up, the amount of revenue you have to generate from the cost is, just grows exponentially. So.
Great. All right, well, I want to open up to the floor. Any questions? Anybody on the floor here for our panel members? Private information out to you guys, so you might need to secretary to absorb it, but if you have any questions, raise your hand. We can get to you. We have 15 minutes left here, so I want to make sure we get a ton of questions. So one in the back. Yes.
Yeah, Bob WIShow from our National. At risk of never getting my name published in RCR magazine again, I do have some exceptions with the beginning of the program, because Andy said that you were basically underwhelmed by the whole topic of DAS being, I assume, that was sort of passé. Well, in fact, I don't know if everybody recognizes this in the room, but I'm using a Verizon phone, sorry, Jim, and I'm getting meg 65 4G inside this room right now. So the DAS turns out to be very, very important in venues like this. My company's installed 1,500 systems, DAS systems, over the last 9 years, and we have, to the other
Travis, do you have a question for this, or is it?
I'd like for the rest of the panel members to actually to speak to these points. I think that they have some valid issues here, or things that they've said, but I think that the DAS have really done a tremendous service inside this industry over a long period of time, and it just evolve and continue. So, Patrick,
So, yes, do you guys think that DAS is good?
DAS is good, Bob.
That's
Yeah,
is good.
I-
That's is good.
Putting my kids through school.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, I think the topic is evolution. Everything evolves. Everything in our industry evolves. The phones are evolving. The way everyone does services, the way the carriers put their programs together. It all grows as the demand grows. There's no doubt there are thousands and thousands of systems out there, and we'll probably replace every one of them eventually with something else. And that's really, I think, part of the evolution, method. I mean, of the technology. The bottom line is, a DAS is an RF distribution system. It's basically a pipe for RF, and we are in the RF business. How you move it, how you get it there, how you get the capacity from the source, those are all the changing dynamics. But it may not even be called a DAS eventually. It may be called something else.
That'd be great.
A DAS.
Well, actually, there's so much hype around small cells, and so let's talk about what it is and what it isn't, right? So with a DAS system, it can support neutral host capabilities, as we already discussed. You could actually deploy one set of infrastructure to support all the wireless operators' traffic. What a neutral host DAS also supports is the ability to, from our perspective, to do a cost share. These things are extremely expensive. And so by going in as a neutral host, we can get our competitors, if you will, to join this system, and we could effectively lower all of our costs in joining this system. The neutral host DAS also supports multiple technologies. So you can support 2G, 3G, 4G, and whatever comes on down the line. All you need to do is add in another RF source. A neutral host DAS also supports multiple sectors and carriers. So if you need additional capacity, additional RF capacity, you can add additional base stations. You could add additional frequency allocations or carriers. So you have a tremendous ability to support a really large public venue. And as I indicated, now we're going to the point where we're sticking, the access points underneath the fan seats, right, as an example. Now let's look at small cells as of today. Our first field applications took place fourth quarter of last year. We started deploying them first quarter of this year. We're, as I already stated, planning on rolling out 40,000 small cells by the end of 2015. But they're a single operator, meaning the small cell solution that we're deploying, unfortunately, will not help Bob's phone work because he's with the other guys, and if he were an AT&T customer, it would work with an AT&T small cell. But it's also a single technology solution. The small cell that we're currently deploying today only supports UMTS and HSPA+. Doesn't do you a whole lot of good for your LTE device. Now we will have a solution supporting UMTS, HSPA+, LTE, and Wi-Fi, and we're expected to deploy that next year. But it's also a single carrier, meaning single frequency allocation solution. So if you're looking at a system capable of handling dense crowds at large public venues like stadiums or even at this conference facility, it's just not going to work. So when you're looking at neutral host DAS systems versus small cells, especially the small cells that are available today, there is a lot of life in DAS. Neutral host DAS systems will likely continue to be the system of choice deployed in large public venues, with small cells being deployed in areas where we don't have the capacity needs. We're we're back to the old days with DAS, right? We need just basic coverage. We don't have coverage in a basement, so, hey, let's just drop in the small cell, call it a day. Because small cells offer a cost advantage over a DAS, but the DAS offers a lot of technology advantages that frankly, aren't available in the small cell package available today.
I got to add to that. So now think about this, what we just talked about with a small cell from a capacity perspective, number of bands, the frequency, the technology. Now try to put that out in a city on poles, all over the city, to provide a very large number of people coverage and capacity. And you can appreciate why it's a toolkit approach, right? You're going to have to do things more from a legacy standpoint and then grow as the electronics, the small cell devices become smaller, higher capacity. The industry needs to be able to adapt and flex as those technologies grow and change. And it's going to be ongoing. It's not going to happen tomorrow.
Well, I'll say my defense, right, but I mentioned that I would probably say that once the DAS form changes to the HetNets form, my whole outlook on DAS changed, so I blame a lot of PCIA for that. So. Anyway, okay. Any other questions or any sort of comments about my strong views? Okay, let's start here.
We got one.
Feel free, please.
Hi, I'm David Moss from the California market. I've been away for 2 years. I'm sorry for my absence, but I can tell you in the 2 years I've been gone, just looking at the attendance in the room, it seems to have grown proportionate to the deployment of gas digital systems. And what I wanted to ask was, in the 1990s we saw tremendous barriers being put up, particularly in California, but then the rest of the country caught on to the deployment at the speed with which we could permit and build macro sites. So my question simply put is, are we seeing any kind of pushback from departments of state architects that routinely and separately review hospital facilities and are very have a lot of scrutiny in regard to any kind of equipment that's co-located in hospitals? And do we see any kind of permitting issues raising there? And then my other question is, are we seeing, with this much intensity of public knowledge of DAS systems coming not just in interior locations, but in exterior locations to a great extent in cities and counties, any kind of further attempt by local zoning and building permit authorities to kind of more intensively regulate the deployment of DAS, even though they are exactly the ones who've been asking for years for a decentralizing and moving away from macro sites, which are more intense and arguably more visually intrusive?
Well, maybe I thought you guys know, Borgo is very active in deploying DAS systems.
Sure.
We've seen, I guess, any changes there when it comes to the regulatory environment or getting those passed by some states.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't do a lot of outdoor DAS. All of our DAS nodes are indoors, but you brought up healthcare, which is, a very unique deployment scenario. There's a lot of equipment communicating with each other. There's a lot of talk about the Internet of Things. That's no more relevant than in the healthcare space. And, layer in Wi-Fi, because a lot of devices now are communicating over Wi-Fi, and there's certainly a lot of considerations to give. And, whose traffic is whose, and who's responsible for what traffic when you start running mission-critical applications over different networks. From a zoning and entitlement perspective, we don't see a lot of that in building. It's mostly an electrical permit that is pulled quite easily. So we don't see huge barriers there. In fact, that's one of the reasons we love in building DAS, is because there's not a whole lot of barriers there. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward, I think.
Jim, if you got any insight in the outdoor part of it?
Oh, I prefer to stay away from regulatory because the PCIA attorneys are far more versed in that.
Yeah.
But I do have a lot to say about hospitals. Early on, back in the day with cellular, oh my God, I'm so old. I remember analog amps, right? Those Motorola phones. And the problem with those devices, they operated at such high power that they were restricted from use for within a healthcare facility because, frankly, they did interfere with sensitive medical equipment. But as we go to, and have vis-a-vis 2G and beyond, digital technology, what in-building wireless systems do is they bring the RF closer to the user with smaller cells. And in doing so, the mobile devices actually operate at a fraction of the power than they would need to if they were transmitting at a cell tower miles away. So therefore, the likelihood of it interfering with a piece of medical equipment has been minimized. Also, hospitals embrace in-building wireless. I cannot think of a vertical that didn't embrace wireless from day one than healthcare, because they need to operate more efficiently, they need to operate at a lower cost level. So they love Wi-Fi. They deploy Wi-Fi, they run a lot of applications. They need the licensed DAS system for a lot of reasons. Not only are these hospitals, they're not too dissimilar than a hotel in that if that hospital has poor coverage, their customers, their patients, though they may not have a choice, may not return to the hospital. They may, if they have elective surgery, go somewhere else. But more importantly, the hospitals are also marketing their facilities to the doctors. And the doctors are very mobile. So they're doing patient runs at the hospital. They're going to their own facility. They need to be reached constantly. And so the doctors will actually contract with the hospital, and if they're unable to run their applications, to update the patient records, to get access to the information they need, probably a little less likely to go at that hospital. And then, of course, the hospital is running other applications on the DAS in addition to Wi-Fi, licensed cellular, but there's a wireless medical telemetry. So now you're enabling the hospital to operate more efficiently because the doctors and healthcare practitioners have access to the information wherever they may be in the facility.
Maybe time for one more quick question on the evolution of DAS. In the back.
Hi, it's kind of a comment into a question. It's kind of touching on, I think, what Bob said. We've deployed, I'm using long to sell network. We've deployed a couple DASs where one of the carriers, mutual host DAS, one of the carriers wanted to integrate a small cell into it. And they were very much all for a small cell attached to the DAS, mainly because there are some limitations, lots of capacity limitations, in which case we have to sectorize the DAS. Ken might be familiar with it. But there's GPS limitations in small cells in some of these venues, like hospitals, hotels, where you don't really have a good path to get an accurate GPS signal. So what we found is that the DAS is very much still needed in situations like this, and it actually worked out quite well. There wasn't really many limitations other than the cost of having to sectorize it. But with that said, do you see any major changes to small cells in terms of DAS because of the limitations, the capacity limitations, and the GPS limitations involved in that, in working its way out of that rather than still very much with the growing DAS market?
So DAS has to keep becoming the host for small cells at some point. If that makes any sense.
Well, I'm going to try to answer some of the questions, not specifically to that project you're doing. And I think we always believe DAS is the original small cell. If you look at small cell today's deployment, compared to how long there's a growing pain that we have learned in DAS deployment, certainly DAS has come to a lot more mature and established solutions in the small cell world, if you will. Now, it depends on how you look at it. There are so many different definitions of small cell. Now, the comment is, I do believe there's a place in applications for both small cell and DAS. And then the panels and people that were talking about, there's more extreme, the high dense capacity, public venues, in the stadiums, convention centers, the airports. Those are the sweet spot for DAS, if you will. There's certain sweet spots for small cell. When you get into something in the middle, is getting more gray area, and I think it really depends on the experience. And I do believe small cell, there's certainly is not going to go anywhere because it creates more capacity, but it takes time. I think the next probably 3-4 years, and then we'll see more clearly. That's my view.
Well, actually, for location accuracy, small cells, already have that problem solved. Prior to joining AT&T, I was the femtocell product manager for Samsung. Samsung's femtocells were initially deployed with both Sprint and Verizon. They have a built-in GPS receiver, and in the event that the femtocell was unable to see the GPS signal, there was an external antenna that could be plugged in. That being said, the small cells that we're deploying today also have a GPS receiver. However, when one of the deployment options would be to deploy the small cell in the basement. Well, guess what? It can't see GPS. What do? When you're provisioning the small cell, you simply encode in what the lat and long coordinates are of that small cell. So if a user is locked in to that small cell and they call 911, it's really not an issue.
All right, any more comments here? All right, well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and this probably isn't in relation to your specific project, but I think we've seen a lot of small cell activity, well, not a lot, but we've seen small cell activity, picocells on top of Wi-Fi as well. When you already have fiber in the walls, you already have a backhaul connection, you're already transmitting traffic, it's pretty easy to scale that with small cells because you just increase the size of the pipe, plug it into the connectivity, and off you go. So we've seen a lot of that and definitely a lot of interest in that. And I think to agree with Patrick, it's not in the big venues, it's in a lot of the kind of smaller tier 2 mid-sized venues, I would say. So.
Great. All right. Well, I think we're just about out of time here, so I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Also, please join me in thanking our panel members too for some